This is a continuation of Operation Haystack by Frank Herbert, comprising the second part and the end. Polly, on Orne's right, looked younger and softer in a green stola gown that hazed her barrel contours. Boulogne, across from her, wore black lounging shorts and knee-length cubby jacket of golden pearl cloth. Everything about the people and setting reeked of wealth, power. For a moment, Orne saw that Stetson's suspicions could have basis in fact. Boulogne might go to any lengths to maintain this luxury. Orne's entrance had interrupted an argument between Polly and her husband. They welcomed him, went right on without inhibition. Rather than embarrassing him, this made him feel more at home, more accepted. "But I'm not running for office this time," said Boulogne patiently. "Why do we have to clutter up the evening with that many people just to—" "Our election night parties are traditional," said Polly. "Well, I'd just like to relax quietly at home tomorrow," he said. "Take it easy with just the family here and not have to—" "It's not like it was a big party," said Polly. "I've kept the list to 50. Diana straightened, said, "This is an important election, Daddy. How could you possibly relax? There are 73 seats in question. The whole balance. If things go wrong in just the ALK sector, why, you could be sent back to the floor. You'd lose your job someone else could take over as—" "Welcome to the job," said Boulogne. "It's a headache." He grinned at Orne. "Sorry to burden you with this, my boy, but the women of this family run me ragged. I guess from what I hear that you've had a pretty busy day, too." He smiled paternally at Diana. "And your first day out of the hospital." "She sets quite a pace, but I've enjoyed it," said Orne. "We're taking the small flitter for a tour of the wilderness area tomorrow," said Diana. "Lou can relax all the way. I'll do the driving." "Be sure you're back in plenty of time for the party," said Polly. "Can't have—" She broke off at a low bell from the alcove behind her. "That'll be for me. Excuse me, please. No, don't get up." Orne bent to his dinner as it came out of the bubble slot beside his plate. Meat in an exotic sauce, Syriac champagne, paloika au semil. More luxury. Presently, Polly returned, resumed her seat. "Anything important?" asked Boulogne. "Only a cancellation for tomorrow night. Professor Wingard is ill." "I'd just as soon it was cancelled down to the 4 of us," said Boulogne. "Unless this is a pose. This doesn't sound like a man who wants to grab more power," thought Orne. "Scotty, you should take more pride in your office," snapped Polly. "You're an important man." "If it weren't for you, I'd be a nobody and prefer it," said Boulogne. He grinned at Orne. "I'm a political idiot compared to my wife. Never saw anyone who could call the turn like she does. Runs in her family. Her mother was the same way." Orne stared at him, fork raised from plate and motionless. A sudden idea had exploded in his mind. "You must know something of this life, Lewis," said Boulogne. "Your father was member for Chargon once, wasn't he?" "Yes," murmured Orne. "But that was before I was born. He died in office." He shook his head, thought. It couldn't be. But— "Do you feel all right, Lou?" asked Diana. "You're suddenly so pale." "Just tired," said Orne. "Guess I'm not used to so much activity." "And I've been a beast keeping you so busy today," she said. "Don't you stand on ceremony here, son," said Polly. She looked concerned. "You've been very sick, and we understand. If you're tired, you go right on into bed." Orne glanced around the table, met anxious attention in each face. He pushed his chair back, said, "Well, if you really don't mind—" "Mind?" barked Polly. "You scoot along now." "See you in the morning, Lou," said Diana. He nodded, turned away, thinking, what a handsome woman. As he started down the hall, he heard Boulogne say to Diana, "Di, perhaps you'd better not take that boy out tomorrow. After all, he is supposed to be here for a rest." Her answer was lost as Orne entered the hall, closed the door. In the privacy of his room, Orne pressed the transceiver stud at his neck, said, "Stet?" A voice hissed in his ears. "This is Mr. Stetson's relief. Orne, isn't it?" "Yes. I want to check right away on those Nathian records the archaeologists found," Find out if Heleb was one of the planets they seeded. Right. Hang on. There was a long silence then. Lou, this is Stet. How come the question about Heleb? Was it on that Nathian list? Negative. Why'd you ask? Are you sure, Stet? It'd explain a lot of things. It's not on the lists, but wait a minute. Silence. Then, Heleb was on line of flight to Auriga, and Auriga was on the list. We've reason to doubt they put anyone down on Auriga. If their ship ran into trouble? That's it, snapped Orn. Keep your voice down or talk subvocally, ordered Stetson. Now answer my question. What's up? Something so fantastic it frightens me, said Orn. Remember that the women who ruled Heleb bred female or male children by controlling the sex of their offspring at conception. The method was unique. In fact, our medics thought it was impossible until… You don't have to remind me of something we want buried and forgotten, interrupted Stetson. Too much chance for misuse of that formula. Yes, said Orn. But what if your Nathian underground is composed entirely of women bred the same way? What if the Heleb women were just a bunch who got out of hand because they'd lost contact with the main element? Holy moly, blurted Stetson. Do you have evidence? Nothing but a hunch, said Orn. Do you have a list of the guests who'll be here for the election party tomorrow? We can get it. Why? Check for women who mastermind their husbands in politics. Let me know how many and who. Lou, that's not enough to… That's all I can give you for now, but I think I'll have more. Remember that. He hesitated, spacing his words as a new thought struck him. The Nathians were nomads. Day began early for the Bolognes. In spite of its being election day, Bologna took off for his office an hour after dawn. See what I mean about this job owning you? He asked Orn. We're going to take it easy today, Lou, said Diana. She took his hand as they came up the steps after seeing her father to his limousine flitter. The sky was cloudless. Orn felt himself liking her hand in his, liking the feel of it too much. He withdrew his hand, stood aside, said, Lead on. I've got to watch myself, he thought. She's too charming. I think a picnic, said Diana. There's a little lake with grassy banks off to the west. We'll take viewers and a couple of good novels. This'll be a do-nothing day. Orn hesitated. There might be things going on at the house that he should watch. But no. If he was right about this situation, then Diana could be the weak link. Time was closing in on them, too. By tomorrow, the Nathians could have the government completely under control. It was warm beside the lake. There were purple and orange flowers above the grassy bank. Small creatures flitted and cheeped in the brush and trees. There was a groomies in the reeds at the lower end of the lake, and every now and then it honked like an old man clearing his throat. When we girls were all at home, we used to picnic here every 8 day, said Diana. She lay on her back on the ground mat they'd spread. Orn sat beside her, facing the lake. We made a raft over there on the other side, she said. She sat up, looked across the lake. You know, I think pieces of it are still there. See? She pointed at a jumble of logs. As she gestured, her hand brushed Orn's. Something like an electric shock passed between them. Without knowing exactly how it happened, Orn found his arms around Diana, their lips pressed together in a lingering kiss. Panic was very close to the surface in Orn. He broke away. I didn't plan for that to happen, whispered Diana. Nor I, muttered Orn. He shook his head. Sometimes things can get into an awful mess. Diana blinked. Lou, don't you like me? He ignored the monitoring transceiver, spoke his mind. They'll just think it's part of the act, he thought. And the thought was bitter. Like you? He asked. I think I'm in love with you. She sighed, leaned against his shoulder. Then what's wrong? You're not already married. Mother had your service record checked. Diana smiled impishly. Mother has second sight. The bitterness was like a sour taste in Orn's mouth. He could see the pattern so clearly. I ran away from home when I was 17, he said. I know, darling. Mother's told me all about you. You don't understand, he said. My father died before I was born. It must have been very hard on your mother, she said. Left all alone with her family, and a new baby on the way. They'd known for a long time, said Orne. My father had Broach's disease and they found out too late. It was already in the central nervous system. How horrible, whispered Diana. Orne's mind felt suddenly like a fish out of water. He found himself grasping at a thought that flopped around just out of reach. Dad was in politics, he whispered. He felt as though he were living in a dream. His voice stayed low, shocked. From when I first began to talk, Mother started grooming me to take his place in public life. And you didn't like politics, said Diana. I hated it, he growled. First chance, I ran away. One of my sisters married a young fellow who's now the member for Chargon. I hope he enjoys it. That'd be Maddie, said Diana. You know her? Asked Orne. Then he remembered what Stetson had told him, and the thought was chilling. Of course I know her, said Diana. Lou, what's wrong with you? You'd expect me to play the same game, you calling the shots, he said. Shoot for the top, cut and scramble, claw and dig. By tomorrow, all that may not be necessary, she said. Orne heard the sudden hiss of the carrier wave in his neck transceiver, but there was no voice from the monitor. What's happening tomorrow? He asked. The election, silly, she said. Lou, you're acting very strangely. Are you sure you're feeling all right? She put a hand to his forehead. Perhaps we'd... Just a minute, said Orne. About us? He swallowed. She withdrew her hand. I think my parents already suspect. We Ballones are notorious love-at-first-sighters. Her overlarge eyes studied him fondly. You don't feel feverish, but maybe we'd better... What a dope I am, snarled Orne. I just realized that I have to be a Nathian too. You just realized? She stared at him. There was a hissing gasp in Orne's transceiver. The identical patterns in our families, he said. Even to the houses. And there's the real key. What a dope. He snapped his fingers. The head. Polly, your mother's the grand boss woman, isn't she? But darling it, of course. You'd better take me to her, and fast, snapped Orne. He touched the stud at his neck, but Stetson's voice intruded. Great work, Lou. We're moving in a special shock force. Can't take any chances with... Orne spoke aloud in panic. Stet! You get out to the Ballones, and you get there alone! No troops! Diana had jumped to her feet, backed away from him. What do you mean? Demanded Stetson. I'm saving our stupid necks, barked Orne. Alone! You hear? Or we'll have a worse mess on our hands than any Rim war. There was an extended silence. You hear me, Stet? Demanded Orne. Okay, Lou, we're putting the O-Force on standby. I'll be at the Ballones in 10 minutes. ComGo will be with me. Pause. And you'd better know what you're doing. It was an angry group in a corner of the Ballones' main salon. Louvered shades cut the green glare of a noon sun. In the background, there was the hum of air conditioning and the clatter of robo-servants preparing for the night's election party. Stetson leaned against the wall beside a divan, hands jammed deeply into the pockets of his wrinkled, patched fatigues. The wagon tracks furrowed his high forehead. Near Stetson, Admiral Sobat Spencer, the IA's commander of galactic operations, paced the floor. ComGo was a bull-necked bald man with wide blue eyes, a deceptively mild voice. There was a caged animal look to his pacing. 3 steps out, 3 steps back. Polly Ballone sat on the divan. Her mouth was pulled into a straight line. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that the knuckles showed white. Diana stood beside her mother. Her fists were clenched at her sides. She shivered with fury. Her gaze remained fixed, glaring at Orne. Okay, so my stupidity set up this little meeting, snarled Orne. He stood about 5 paces in front of Polly, hands on hips. The Admiral, pacing away at his right, was beginning to wear on his nerves. But you'd better listen to what I have to say. He glanced at the ComGo. All of you. Admiral Spencer stopped pacing, glowered at Orn. I have yet to hear a good reason for not tearing this place apart, getting to the bottom of this situation. You traitor, Lewis, husked Polly. I'm inclined to agree with you, madam, said Spencer, only from a different point of view. He glanced at Stetson. Any word yet on Scotty Balone? They were going to call me the minute they found him, said Stetson. His voice sounded cautious, brooding. You were coming to the party here tonight, weren't you, Admiral? Asked Orn. What's that have to do with anything? Demanded Spencer. Are you prepared to jail your wife and daughters for conspiracy? Asked Orn. A tight smile played around Polly's lips. Spencer opened his mouth, closed it soundlessly. The Nathians are mostly women, said Orn. There's evidence that your womenfolk are among them. The Admiral looked like a man who had been kicked in the stomach. What evidence? He whispered. I'll come to that in a moment, said Orn. Now, note this. The Nathians are mostly women. There were only a few accidents and a few planned males like me. That's why there were no family names to trace, just a tight little female society, all working to positions of power through their men. Spencer cleared his throat, swallowed. He seemed powerless to take his attention from Orn's mouth. My guess, said Orn, is that about 30 or 40 years ago, the conspirators first began breeding a few males, grooming them for really choice top positions. Other Nathian males, the accidents where sex control failed. They never learned about the conspiracy. These new ones were full-fledged members. That's what I'd have been if I'd panned out as expected. Polly glared at him, looked back at her hands. That part of the plan was scheduled to come to a head with this election, said Orn. If they pulled this one off, they could move in more boldly. You're in way over your head, boy, growled Polly. You're too late to do anything about us. We'll see about that, barked Spencer. He seemed to have regained his self-control. A little publicity in the right places, some key arrests and… No, said Orn. She's right. It's too late for that. It was probably too late 100 years ago. These dames were too firmly entrenched even then. Stetson straightened away from the wall, smiled grimly at Orn. He seemed to be understanding a point that the others were missing. Diana still glared at Orn. Polly kept her attention on her hands, the tight smile playing about her lips. These women probably control 1 out of 3 of the top positions in the League, said Orn. Maybe more. Think, Admiral. Think what would happen if you exposed this thing. There'd be secessions, riots, sub-governments would topple, the central government would be torn by suspicions and battles. What breeds in that atmosphere? He shook his head. The Rim War would seem like a picnic. We can't just ignore this, barked Spencer. He stiffened, glared at Orn. We can and we will, said Orn. No choice. Polly looked up, studied Orn's face. Diana looked confused. Once a Nathian, always a Nathian, eh? Snarled Spencer. There's no such thing, said Orn. 500 years crossbreeding with other races saw to that. There's merely a secret society of astute political scientists. He smiled wryly at Polly, glanced back at Spencer. Think of your own wife, sir. In all honesty, would you be Comgo today if she hadn't guided your career? Spencer's face darkened. He drew in his chin, tried to stare Orn down, failed. Presently, he chuckled wryly. Sobi is beginning to come to his senses, said Polly. You're about through, son. Don't underestimate your future son-in-law, said Orn. Ha! Barked Diana. I hate you, Lewis Orn. You'll get over that, said Orn mildly. Oh! Diana quivered with fury. My major point is this, said Orn. Government is a dubious glory. You pay for your power and wealth by balancing on the sharp edge of the blade. That great amorphous thing out there, the people, has turned and swallowed many governments. The only way you can stay in power is by giving good government. Otherwise, sooner or later, your turn comes. I can remember my mother making that point. It's one of the things that stuck with me. He frowned. My objection to politics is the compromises you have to make to get elected. Stetson moved out from the wall. It's pretty clear, he said. Heads turned toward him. To stay in power, the Nathians had to give us a fairly good government. On the other hand, if we expose them, we give a bunch of political amateurs, Every fanatic and power-hungry demagogue in the galaxy. Just the weapon they need to sweep them into office. After that, chaos, said Orn. So we let the Nathians continue, with 2 minor alterations. We alter nothing, said Polly. It occurs to me, Lewis, that you don't have a leg to stand on. You have me, but you'll get nothing out of me. The rest of the organization can go on without me. You don't dare expose us. We hold the whip hand. The IA could have 90% of your organization in custody inside of 10 days, said Orn. You couldn't find them, snapped Polly. How? Asked Stetson. Nomads, said Orn. This house is a glorified tent. Men on the outside, women on the inside. Look for inner courtyard construction. It's instinctive with Nathian blood. Add to that an inclination for odd musical instruments. The kaithra, the tambour, the oboe, all nomad instruments. Add to that female dominance of the family. An odd twist on the nomad heritage, but not completely unique. Check for predominance of female offspring. Dig into political background. We'll miss damn few. Polly just stared at him, mouth open. Spencer said, Things are moving too fast for me. I know just one thing. I'm dedicated to preventing another Rim War. If I have to jail every last one of... An hour after this conspiracy became known, you wouldn't be in a position to jail anyone, said Orn. The husband of a Nathian. You'd be in jail yourself, or more likely dead at the hands of a mob. Spencer paled. What's your suggestion for compromise? Asked Polly. Number 1, the IA gets veto power on any candidate you put up, said Orn. Number 2, you can never hold more than 2/3 of the top offices. Who in the IA vetoes our candidates? Asked Polly. Admiral Spencer, Stet, myself. Anyone else we deem trustworthy, said Orn. You think you're a god or something? Demanded Polly. No more than you do, said Orn. This is what's known as a check and balance system. You cut the pie. We get first choice on which pieces to take. There was a protracted silence. Then Spencer said, It doesn't seem right just to... No political compromise is ever totally right, said Polly. You keep patching up things that always have flaws in them. That's how government is. She chuckled, looked up at Orn. All right, Lewis. We accept. She glanced at Spencer, who shrugged, nodded glumly. Polly looked back at Orn. Just answer me one question. How'd you know I was boss lady? Easy, said Orn. The records we found said the Nathian, he'd almost said traitor family on Merak, was coded as the head. Your name, Polly, contains the ancient word pol, which means head. Polly looked at Stetson. Is he always that sharp? Every time, said Stetson. If you want to go into politics, Lewis, said Polly, I'd be delighted to, I'm already in politics as far as I want to be, growled Orn. What I really want is to settle down with Di, catch up on some of the living I've missed. Diana stiffened. I never want to see, hear from or hear of Mr. Lewis Orn ever again, she said. That is final, emphatically final. Orn's shoulders drooped. He turned away, stumbled, and abruptly collapsed full length on the thick carpets. There was a collective gasp behind him. Stetson barked, Call a doctor! They warned me at the hospital he was still hanging on a thin thread. There was the sound of Polly's heavy footsteps running toward the hall. Lou! It was Diana's voice. She dropped to her knees beside him, soft hands fumbling at his neck, his head. Turn him over and loosen his collar, snapped Spencer. Give him air. Gently, they turned Orn onto his back. He looked pale. Diana loosed his collar, buried her face against his neck. Oh, Lou, I'm sorry, she sobbed. I didn't mean it. Please, Lou. Please don't die. Please. Orn opened his eyes, looked up at Spencer and Stetson. There was the sound of Polly's voice talking rapidly on the phone in the hall. He could feel Diana's cheek warm against his neck, the dampness of her tears. Slowly, deliberately, Orn winked at the two men. The end. Best audiobooks for free hopes that you have enjoyed this production of Operation Haystack by Frank Herbert. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble, as your subscription is the support we need to create more great, free content. Please look to our website at bestaudiobooks for free.com for a complete list of our audiobooks.